China is gradually moving towards becoming the next Japan, and this shift could lead to one of history's most severe economic crises. But why is that? The East Asian powerhouse's significant investments in encouraging the formation of rural enterprises and private businesses and investments in military prowess have miraculously upscaled its economy, encouraging its persistent efforts to challenge American dominance. Like China, Japan experienced a similar economic miracle, and just as it was close to surpassing the United States as the world's largest economy, its economic bubble burst, plunging the whole of Japan into what is now recognized as the lost decades. Currently, China is on a similar path and could fare even worse than Japan. To fully understand what's going on, we need to go back in time to the story of Japan after World War II. While we've covered Japan's history in a previous video, we'll give a simplified overview now. The Japan of the 1950s was a period during which Japan, a country heavily affected and virtually poor by the aftermath of World War II, miraculously experienced an economic transformation that changed Japan's story forever. The aftermath of the heavy bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and various other raids in Japan during the Cold War weakened Japan's economy. Major sectors like its cotton industry and housing sector took a huge hit, and Japan was practically in ruins. The country was almost completely taken over by famine, and its standard of living plunged deep. This was Japan's reality until 1946, when America's food shipments averted its famine issue. Japan then gradually recovered after an economic crisis. Externally, the American occupation forces introduced crucial reforms, such as land redistribution and dismantling large industrial conglomerates, fostering a more equitable environment for Japan's economic growth. From 1955 to 1990, Japan saw an economic growth of 6.8% per year, and its GDP increased exponentially 8 times. Its economy was doing so great that it only saw a 3% decline once during its first oil shock in 1974. However, the words growth, increase, and multiply were commonly used to describe Japan's economy between 1967 and 1971 due to the country's sound growth. Its consumption rate in recreational and entertainment activities and goods, including transportation, communications, furniture, and reading, was almost crippling after the war soared, and Japan saw a significant shift in its GDP. By then, Japan's GDP hit a jaw-dropping $91 billion, which by 1980 was reaching a whopping $1.065 trillion. At this point, the United States, initially excited about Japan's growth since Japan was an important trade partner, started to panic as Japan seemed to be moving to upscale it. By the 80s, Japan was already dominating the automobile and electronics sectors, an area the US used to be on top of. It also created and exported consumer goods of higher quality, yet cheaper than its American competition to various countries, including the US. On top of that, Japanese brands were in higher demand than American brands in the US. Japanese businesses also had a hefty cash inflow used to go on shopping sprees worldwide, buying everything ranging from real estate to American factories and movie studios. As a result, rumors about America eventually being bought up by the Japanese and Japan dominating the US economy began to spread. Japan achieved this economic level due to the implementation of heavy industrialization, which the then Prime Minister Hayato Akita adopted. It created an alliance between keiretsu conglomerates, large Japanese corporations that owned shares in each other's businesses, and the Japanese government as they jointly worked to support each other. The larger companies were given enormous loans to repay their debts, which enabled them to sell products below market price, exclude foreign companies from Japanese industries, and inflate the stock and real estate markets. But little did they know that it was the beginning of their country's doom. Japan's success came spiraling in the 1980s, when its inflated economic bubble deflated due to the rapid and uncontrollable appreciation of the yen. This occurred after the US introduced the Plaza Accord, which allowed the dollar's depreciation, an internationally made decision that heavily affected Japan's economy. It led to a massive money-easing program in Japan, and the country's inflated stock and real estate market collapsed, revealing a large part of its economy to be filled with companies that would have gone bankrupt if it weren't for Japan's uncontrollable supply of cheap cash. Just like that, Japan's 3 decades of growth ended in 1990 and was immediately followed by another 3 decades of loss, marking the beginning of the lost decades. The people who were unlucky enough to have started their careers during Japan's economic miracle became known as the lost generations. What's crazy is that it looks like China is heading down the same path as Japan, and the similarities between their stories are almost unbelievable. Like Japan, China has experienced 30 years of rapid economic increase, becoming a major stakeholder in the manufacturing industry. It creates, sells, and exports its own electronic brands and consumer goods to different countries worldwide. We're seeing similar investments in brands worldwide, especially in the United States by China, displaying the same pattern of being fueled by loans from its government to buy factories and properties in the US, just like Japan did over 3 decades ago. This led to China becoming the world's second largest economy, taking the crown from Japan. It's also become the world's largest export country as its economy improved drastically. So, like Japan, China is attempting to become the world's largest superpower and surpass the United States. But it now seems like it did for Japan, that China's economy is falling apart after 3 decades of economic greatness. But how is China's situation similar to that of Japan's? They both believed in one thing: pumping money into a particular sector whenever it seems to be failing. A large part of China's GDP growth in the past 2 decades has resulted from massive investments by the state into sectors like real estate and infrastructure. Whenever the economy seems spiraling, the Chinese government pumps more money into the economy while building more infrastructure and heavily investing in the real estate market. While this initially helped China grow, it stopped working, and by then, the country's debt level had grown swiftly, with predictions of an even higher debt rate till 2028. Since the debt rate is so high, the Chinese government isn't targeting profit maximization, but it's focused on debt reduction to ultimately save its economy from dwindling. As a result, its property market has collapsed, reducing the country's economic growth rate. However, financial experts are predicting that these signs show that China will gradually experience a period of prolonged economic stagnation, just like Japan experienced 3 decades ago. But could China face the same fate as Japan did 3 decades ago? Well, it could be, but it also has the potential of becoming even worse than Japan. The thing is, back when Japan's economic bubble shattered in the 90s, it was a highly developed country. In fact, Japan was the first developed country in East Asia. It was also one of the wealthiest countries in the world at the time, with a GDP per capita almost 50% higher than that of the United States. Coupled with a high standard of living and excellent quality of life, Japan was doing well enough for itself when its economy started to decline, making it the 4th country on the list of the world's largest economies, with Germany having recently surpassed it. Meanwhile, China, on the other hand, is a different ballgame. Even though it managed to find a permanent solution to impoverishment, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, it remains a middle-income economy with a GDP per capita comparable to that of Mexico. So if its economy were to sink deeper than it is now, it would cease being the 2nd largest economy and be in a much worse situation than Japan was 3 decades ago. Moreover, China has also decided to tilt towards adopting more foreign policy and dipping its hands into politics rather than focusing on growing businesses. Hence, we're hearing more stories about China's possible invasion of Taiwan and a potential military battle with the United States. While its invasion of Taiwan has not been confirmed yet, the rumors have fueled foreign capital's quick exit from China, seeing as its economy is no longer predictable, safe, or stable given the battle and invasion rumors. Although China does not depend on foreign capital as much as it used to, the Chinese economy is still very much affected, causing problems Japan did not face during its time. However, it is still important to note that China's economy is growing at about 4.6% per year, which is much slower than it used to grow. At this point, it is unlikely that China would face complete stagnation like Japan did, but its growth has been predicted to slow down in the nearest years and will keep slowing down as the year passes. It's already bad enough that China's economy is dwindling, but a continuous dipping? It already spells doom for China's future.